Ho begged him near the end to let it go. One September morning, a 26-year-old mail carrier named Caleb Doss knocks on that door for the 100th time, just to drop off a water bill. He has no idea that before winter comes, he will be the one carrying that box down Main Street, past every storefront in town, while the whole of Mercer Ridge stops what it's doing to watch him walk by. What was inside that box would bring an entire town to silence. But first, you have to understand the man who kept it closed for so long. Mercer Ridge is the kind of town you pass through on your way to somewhere else. One blinking light, a feed store, a diner called Ruthie's that's been open since Eisenhower was president, cornfields on 3 sides, and on the 4th a creek that floods every April like clockwork. Caleb Doss has driven the same mail route for 4 years now. He knows which dogs bark and which ones just watch. He knows Mrs. Kowalski gets a letter from her son in Seattle on the 3rd of every month. And he knows to slow down near the Petrakis place because their mailbox leans like it's about to give up entirely. And he knows Warren Holt. Warren lives at the end of Porch Street, in a house the color of weathered barnwood, with a rocking chair that's older than Caleb's own father. Every day, rain or shine, Warren is out there by 10 in the morning, a thermos of black coffee at his feet, watching the road like he's waiting on something that never quite arrives. Warren is 91 years old. His hands shake now when he lifts that thermos, but his eyes don't. They're pale blue, sharp as a hawk's, and when he looks at you, you get the feeling he's not looking at you at all. He's looking through you, at something 30 years further back or 70. He wears the same flannel shirt most days, sleeves rolled to the elbow and on his left wrist, a watch with a cracked face that stopped telling time sometime around 1953. He never had it fixed. When Caleb once asked him why, Warren just said, "Some things are supposed to stay stopped," and went back to his coffee. There's a wooden box that sits on the windowsill behind him. Caleb has seen it 100 times through the porch screen. Plain pine, no markings, closed with a small brass hook. Nobody in town has ever seen it open, not even Warren's daughter, Louise, who drives in from Ohio twice a year and has given up asking. This particular September morning, Caleb pulls up to the mailbox, and something is different. Warren isn't in the rocking chair. He's standing at the end of the driveway, in his flannel shirt, holding the wooden box against his chest like it might try to run off. And when Caleb rolls down the window to say good morning, Warren says something that stops him cold. "Son, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask me why until I'm ready to tell you, if you're watching this from a small town of your own, the kind with one blinking light and a diner that never changes. Tell us where you're tuning in from down in the comments. We'd love to know." Caleb parks the mail truck. This isn't in the job description, but 4 years on this route has taught him that some days, the job isn't really about the mail. Warren doesn't invite him inside. He sits back down in the rocking chair, sets the box in his lap, and for a long moment just looks at it. 70 years, Warren says. 70 years I've had this box, and I have never once let it come open. Caleb doesn't say anything. He's learned that with old men like Warren, silence is an invitation, not a gap to fill. "I was 22 when I came home," Warren says. "Korea. You wouldn't know much about that war. Nobody does anymore. They call it the Forgotten War. And I suppose that's fair because for the longest time I tried to forget it myself." He taps the brass hook on the box but doesn't open it. "There was a fella in my unit. Younger than me, if you can believe that. Boy from 3 towns over, Aldridge. His name was Thomas Weller, and everybody just called him Tommy. He talked about his mother the whole time. Every letter he wrote, every quiet minute we had, it was about getting home to see his mother." Warren's jaw tightens. Tommy didn't make it home. The rocking chair creaks. Somewhere down the street, a dog barks twice and goes quiet. Before he died, he asked me for one thing. He made me promise. And I gave him my word right there, and I meant it with everything I had in me. He finally looks up at Caleb, and there's something raw in those pale blue eyes, something that's been buried under 70 years of flannel shirts and quiet mornings. "I have never kept that promise," Warren says. "Not once. Not in 70 years. And that, right there, is the first door. But Warren isn't ready to open it all the way. Not yet. I need you to take this box," he says, "and deliver it. Not through the mail. In your hands. To the Weller house on Aldridge Road. Today, if you can manage it." "What's in the box, Warren?" Warren shakes his head slowly. You'll know when the person who needs to know knows. That's how a promise works, son. You don't get to skip to the end. Caleb drives the mail truck out past the edge of town, past the corn that's gone gold and heavy with September, and he can't stop thinking about the way Warren's hands trembled around that box. Not from age, but from something closer to fear. He thinks about his own father, 3 years gone now. There's a letter Caleb has never opened either, one his father left him sealed with instructions that said only, "When you're ready." Not before. It's been sitting in the top drawer of his dresser for 3 years, and every time Caleb reaches for it, he pulls his hand back. He hasn't told anyone that. Not his mother. Not his fiancée, Dana, who has asked him twice why he flinches every time she opens the dresser drawer looking for socks. Caleb doesn't know it yet, but he is about to spend the day learning what it costs a man to carry something unopened for 70 years, and what it might cost him to keep doing the same thing. The Weller house is smaller than he expected. White paint gone gray at the edges, a porch with 2 chairs and a mailbox with the name Weller painted by hand in careful letters that have faded to a whisper. An old woman answers the door. She has to be close to Warren's age, maybe older. Her hair is white and pinned back, and she moves slow, leaning on a cane with a handle worn smooth by decades of use. "Can I help you, young man?" "Ma'am, my name's Caleb Doss. I carry the mail for Mercer Ridge. I've got something. Here from Warren Holt. He asked me to bring it to you personally." The woman's face changes the instant she hears the name Warren Holt, she says quiet, like she's tasting a word she hasn't said in years. "Lord, I haven't heard that name since 1953. She doesn't invite him in right away. She just stands there, one hand on the doorframe, looking at the box in Caleb's hands like it might be dangerous. "You'd better come in," she finally says. "I think it's time." Her name is Margaret Weller. Tommy's mother, she's 93. She sets a kettle on the stove out of habit more than hospitality. Her hands moving slow and careful, and while it heats, she sits across from Caleb at a kitchen table with a checkered cloth that's been washed so many times the pattern has nearly disappeared. "My son Tommy went off to Korea in 1950, she says. "He was 19. Wrote me every week, regular as Sunday church, right up until the letters just stopped." She looks at the box, still closed, sitting between them like a held breath. "A man came to my door in the spring of 1953, Margaret says. Young man. Said he'd served with Tommy. Said he had something of his to bring me, and that he needed a little time to make it right before he could hand it over." She looks up at Caleb. That man was Warren Holt, and I never saw him again, not once, not in 70 years. Caleb feels something tighten in his chest. He'd assumed, the way you assume things when a story is only half told, that this was some kind of love story. An old flame, a promise between sweethearts. He was wrong, and the moment he realizes he was wrong, the whole shape of Warren's 70 years of silence shifts into something heavier. "He told me he'd bring it when he was ready," Margaret says. "I waited. Then I got older. Then I stopped expecting it, because that's what you do eventually with the things you've stopped expecting." Her hand moves to the brass hook. "May I?" Caleb nods, though it isn't really his to give permission for. Margaret's fingers, thin and spotted with age, lift the hook free. There is a wooden box on a shelf in a small house in Mercer Ridge. For 70 years, nobody was allowed to open it. Not his wife. Not his children. Not the doctor inside the box. A folded American flag, small, the kind given at a military service. A photograph of 2 young soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like the whole world hadn't happened yet. A pocket knife with the initials TW scratched crooked into the handle, and an envelope. Yellowed. Never opened. Addressed in handwriting gone soft with age to Mrs. Margaret Weller. Margaret's hands are shaking now. "He never sent it," she whispers. 70 years and he never sent it. That evening, Caleb drives back to Porch Street. Warren is in his rocking chair, exactly where he always is, and when Caleb's truck pulls up, the old man doesn't ask how it went. He already knows somehow by the look on Caleb's face. "She read it?" Warren asks. "She's reading it right now," Caleb says. "She asked me to give you something in return." He hands Warren a small folded piece of paper. Warren's trembling fingers open it. It's short, just a few lines in Margaret's careful old-fashioned script. Caleb doesn't read it. Some things aren't his to read. Warren reads it twice. Then he sets it in his lap and looks out at the road for a long, long moment. "You want to know what happened?" Warren says. "It isn't a question." Caleb sits down on the porch step. "Only if you want to tell me." Warren nods slowly. Tommy took a wound that we both knew he wasn't walking away from. And in that last hour, he made me promise two things. First, that I'd carry a letter to his mother, one he wrote her but never got to send on account of we'd run out of time and paper both. He dictated it to me, word for word, and I wrote it down in his voice as best I could, and I sealed it, and I swore on everything I had that I would put it in her hands myself. He pauses. His throat works. The second thing he asked, Warren says, was that I go on living. Really living? Not just surviving it. He made me promise that too. So why did it take 70 years? Warren looks down at his cracked watch. The one stopped at some hour in 1953 that only he understands. Because I came home and I couldn't look at that woman without seeing her son die in my arms. Warren says, voice breaking for the first time. I told myself I'd deliver it when I could do it without falling apart in front of her. I told myself that for 1 year, then 5, then 20, and somewhere in there, waiting for the day I'd be strong enough became its own kind of cowardice. And I didn't know how to admit that to myself, let alone to her. He looks at Caleb now, and there's something almost pleading in his face. I kept the second promise, Warren says. I lived. I married Ruth, God rest her, raised Louise, built a life. But I broke the first promise every single day for 70 years, because I let fear win the argument every morning I woke up. Caleb drives home that night past the cornfields, gone dark now, past Ruthie's diner with its lights still on, and he doesn't go inside his own house right away. He sits in his truck in the driveway for a long time. Then he goes in, opens the top drawer of his dresser, and takes out the letter his father left him 3 years ago. He's told himself all kinds of reasons for not opening it, that he wasn't ready, that some griefs need time, that he'd know when the moment was right. But sitting there in his kitchen, turning the envelope over in his hands, Caleb understands, really understands, for the first time, that when I'm ready can quietly turn into never if you let it. That the moment doesn't arrive on its own. Somebody has to choose it. He opens the letter. It isn't long. His father wasn't a man of many words. But in it there's an apology for years spent working too much and saying too little. And there's pride, plain, unguarded pride, in the man Caleb grew up to be. There's also something Caleb didn't expect. His father telling him not to wait, the way he himself had always waited. To say the things that mattered. Caleb sits at his kitchen table and cries for the first time since the funeral. Dana finds him there 20 minutes later, and this time when she asks what's wrong, he doesn't wave her off. He tells her everything, about Warren, about Margaret, about the letter in the drawer he's been avoiding for 3 years. Some promises, Caleb realizes, aren't kept by grand gestures. They're kept by the simple, terrifying act of finally opening the thing you've been carrying closed. Word travels fast in a town of one blinking light. By the following Saturday, half of Mercer Ridge knows the story. Not every detail, but enough. Enough that when Warren Holt asks Caleb for one more favor, half the town turns out to see it through. Warren wants to walk, on his own 2 feet down Main Street to Ruthie's diner, where Margaret Weller is waiting for him. 91 years old, cracked watch on his wrist, walking slower than he used to, but walking all the same, past the feed store and the hardware store and the barber shop, while folks step out onto the sidewalk and go quiet, hats coming off, the way people do when they understand, or without being told, that they're witnessing something that matters. Caleb walks beside him. Not because Warren needs the support, though he takes it gladly, but because some walks you don't make alone if you don't have to. At the door of Ruthie's, Margaret is waiting in a chair someone's pulled out special for her. When Warren reaches her, he doesn't say anything grand. He just takes her hand in both of his and says, "I'm sorry it took 70 years. And Margaret, who has had 70 years to practice forgiveness, says the only thing that matters, you came. That's what he would have wanted. Not the 70 years, just in that you came. The whole diner is silent. Somewhere someone is crying without trying to hide it, and nobody thinks less of them for it. Here is what Caleb Doss carries with him now, on every mail route, past every porch, past every closed door. He'll never fully know the story behind. A promise unkept is not a promise broken forever. It's only broken while you're still too afraid to keep it. Warren Holt spent 70 years believing his silence was protecting Margaret Weller from more pain. What it actually did was rob them both of 70 years of peace they could have shared together, grieving a good young man side by side instead of alone. And Caleb, who delivers letters for a living, who spends every day of his working life carrying other people's words to other people's doors, had a letter of his own sitting 3 feet from where he slept every night, waiting for him to be brave enough to read it. Sometimes the mail we're most afraid of is the mail already in our own hands. Warren Holt passed away the following spring, in his own bed in the house on Port Street, with his daughter Louise beside him and that cracked watch still on his wrist. At his request, they buried him with the pocket knife with Tommy Weller's initials scratched into the handle. The promise. Finally, fully kept, Margaret Weller lived 2 more years. She and Warren became close in that short time. Not sweethearts, nothing like that. Just 2 people who'd shared the same grief for 70 years finally allowed to share it together instead of apart. She used to say those 2 years were worth more to her than the 70 that came before. Caleb still carries the mail through Mercer Ridge. He kept his father's letter, and he reads it every year on the day his father passed. And they say on quiet mornings you can still see him pause outside the old house on Port Street, just for a second, like he's saying thank you to somebody who isn't there anymore, but ought to be thanked all the same. If there is a promise sitting unkept in your life today, a call you haven't made, a letter you haven't opened, a word you haven't said to somebody who's still here to hear it, maybe this story is your sign that today is a good day to stop waiting for the right moment. Because sometimes, the right moment isn't something that arrives, it's something you choose. We believe stories like Warren's find their way to the people who need them, right on time by a hand far steadier than our own. Has someone ever kept a promise to you, even decades later? Tell us about it in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, we'd be so grateful if you'd hit like and subscribe. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next story.